All right, let's make a painting. This one ended up being a huge struggle, especially towards the end. But that is a story for later. In the meantime, we are going to start by doing exactly what I always do to start, and that's going to be stretching my canvas. I'm not going to go over it that much in this video because I do in every single one, though I will reiterate in every single video that making a high quality surface to paint on can make or break your painting. In this case, I broke the painting regardless of the surface, but we ended up fixing that. I believe the title is going to be something along the lines of how to loosen up your painting by not using an underdrawing. So I'm actually going to use a digital software called Krita in order to explain exactly what I'm doing before I put it on the canvas. So the way this is going to be broken down is we're going to jump over to Krita, and I'm going to put the reference photo up. I'm going to trace over the reference photo, which is now what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to draw those shapes. And I'm basically just breaking down exactly what I'm doing. So step one, trace the shape that I want. And then I'm going to draw it over on the right, still in Krita. And then I'm going to go over to my painting layer by layer, and I'm going to add exactly what I do over here. It's basically just a 3-step process that I think will be very helpful to watch. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't fully show when they do this. They just show you break it down on the canvas and you're like, how the fuck did you get there? This is how we get there. I break it into the most simple shapes that I possibly can. I will note that this is a completely unnecessary step. This is not something you need to do, but it can be helpful just to see what I'm doing. So this is kind of like what my brain does when I then go over here to the canvas and break it down. Like, this isn't a required step. I can just look at a reference photo and break this down and then slowly add layer to layer to layer. And that's pretty much this whole video. It's me back and forth between this up until the end where everything goes awry. All right, so jumping into the canvas, I'm using pretty much ultramarine blue straight out of the tube for this first layer, and I don't really have a reason why I'm doing that. I just felt like it was dark and I could. I'm using a bit of Gamsol in this to thin it down so it's going to dry a little bit easier, but even beyond it drying easier and faster, it is going to be really easy to layer more paint on top of paint that's been thinned down with Gamsol. Like, I could just take another thing of paint or another like color that I mix and just paint directly over this, which is what I do end up doing here at the end of it. But I will say that learning how to layer things like this allows you to paint wet into wet, and it's kind of the base process for this whole first half of the painting. That way I don't have to wait 2, 3, 4 days between each of these layers to dry. It can get a little bit confusing because there's a lot of different types of paints that all act differently, but to be very general with it, thick paint will go over thin paint pretty easily, and light paint will go over dark paint pretty easily. And then also on top of that, opaque paint will go over transparent paint pretty easily. And when you mix all of those together, you can kind of start to understand how each one is going to interact with each other. But just generally speaking, try and follow those rules. Or if you're really struggling with it, just let the paint dry. And then you can go back in with another layer. All that being said, I'm kind of eating my words right now because I'm doing exactly what I shouldn't be doing. I'm using a light opaque white color, which is going to be very hard to layer over, and you're going to see that pretty shortly when I start to try and layer over that like lighter area with these darks that I'm now tracing over this and then transferring onto my other drawing. It just doesn't work that well, and I ended up like kind of just working through it. But do note that if you do what I just did right there, you're gonna kind of screw yourself over later. Back to the digital drawing, we are now breaking those first 2 shapes down into smaller shapes. And that's just gonna help us keep the painting very simple and very easy to transfer over to the canvas without getting too heavily detailed. Because if you try and go in and really hone in on details right away, it gives you very little opportunity to change the painting layer by layer. Like, once you're like stuck with like, oh, I drew 2 eyes and they have to be perfect, you're almost too committed to that shape and that area, which is why I like to use this method, because it allows me to change things and push things around without being too attached to the painting. This is where very loose paintings come from. This is very much a sergeant kind of technique where you're really starting very, very general, like as general shapes as you can get, If you look back at the first thing, it was just a light and a dark, and now we're going back in and breaking things down, and we're just looking at shapes here. I'm not really trying to make a face. Like I'm transferring or tracing the drawing on the left just for sake of like seeing what I'm doing. But you can immediately jump to this step here where you're like breaking things down and doing that same initial thing. But you can go straight from the reference photo to that. Like start general and go shape by shape and just break things down slowly. It really eliminates the fear of drawing and painting at the same time, because this layer, like the last two layers, take me like maybe 5-10 minutes to do. So you're really not that invested in each area, so you're always willing to change it. The looseness of your painting comes from confidence, and you can't be confident with something, you can't be confident with your drawing and brushwork if you're afraid to mess it up. So this is almost like hacking your brain into not giving a shit about the painting until the very end. And even when you get to the very end, you should still not give a shit about the painting, which is foreshadowing for what does happen. Instead of sitting here and saying the same things over and over and over again as I break down each of these layers, I do want to talk about my Patreon, because I did just start one, and oh my god, marketing yourself is terrible. But if you do happen to want to support me in any way, I would really appreciate it. I'm kind of just doing basic critiques on people's work over there. I'm breaking them down, like kind of like exactly what I'm doing right here. I already have like 7-8 critiques done. Or if you just want to throw me $5 and kind of see what I'm doing behind the scenes, I have pictures of this painting that I'm working on now as I was working on it, and I would really appreciate it. So that helps me kind of keep making these videos without having to sell you Squarespace ads. But if Squarespace does want to hit me up and pay my car, that'd be fucking wonderful. In the meantime, layer. Also, if you want a print or just want to check out my website, or maybe potentially ever want a painting, I have an email list that you can subscribe to over on my website. And that's pretty much just going to give you first dibs on anything that I ever release, which is hopefully going to be a bunch of paintings coming up here shortly as I kind of go into my best season, which tends to be like Black Friday, holidays time. Either way, if you ever wanted a painting, or you wanted a print, or you wanted a discount on a print, foreshadowing for Black Friday, go subscribe to my email list and you'll get updates when things are available. Alright, so why am I making this painting? This is a study for a much larger painting. The reference photo over here on the left that I'm kind of tracing over, you kind of see it here and there as I undo that layer. That's actually a smaller clip of a much larger, not a smaller clip, but a smaller frame of a much larger reference photo that I want to paint. And I'm thinking it might be my next like big painting that I do. So if you are interested in seeing me do this painting again, much larger and much more detailed, definitely subscribe, because that should be coming up in the next few months. Possibly after Christmas, as I tend to get a lot of orders and end up having to pack a lot of prints around then. But we'll see when I have time for it. But that, I believe, will be my next large painting. So this is, again, a study to just kind of like break down and start to get familiar with the subject and see where things and areas that I'm having trouble with, so I can almost like practice for the final thing. And that brings me to a little, I don't know, brings me to something, but achieving likeness. How do we achieve likeness? Should I delete this part? Maybe. A likeness, I feel like is more representational of like where the shadows are. Like if you look at somebody that's like down the street, you're not really looking at their eyes, you're not really looking at the shape of their mouth, you're just generally looking at the shape of their face and like the way that the shadows hit their face. Because if you see your friend down the street, you can still recognize that it's your friend, and it's like, how is your brain able to do that? Well, it's because you're recognizing the way that light hits their face, creating shadows. So how do we achieve that in painting? Well, focus on the shadows, same exact thing. As long as the shape of those shadows are correct on the face, you are going to get a likeness. And also, as long as those shapes are semi-accurate, you can get pretty close without really having to go that much into detail. Now you could take something that has just the right shadow shapes and paste literally any feature you want onto their face, and it's still gonna look like the person. And that's how artists create likeness. It's always shapes. So after I have that initial layer down, I block in that second layer, and then we're gonna go in and we're gonna start putting in kind of highlights or general highlight areas in. And if we get to the end of that step and you don't have a likeness yet, or at least general likeness, especially if you step way back, then you're gonna wanna kind of go back and start over, not start over, but kind of like at that point see where you went wrong, because no amount of detailing past this point is going to get you anywhere closer to looking like the person that you're trying to paint. If you get to this point and it looks wrong, you've got bigger structural issues and like shape issues rather than... What is happening outside my room right now? Oh my god, it sounds like someone's power washing my garage door. I hope you can't hear that. All right, back to what I was saying. What was I saying? Shapes. Yes, make shapes, don't make details. And everyone will be happy. And if you get here and you don't have general likeness, then start over. Or don't. I don't know. All right, I'm gonna start speeding up these digital aspects of this video, just because I think that you're starting to get the point. Is just start with big shapes and then slowly break them down into smaller shapes up into the point where you have a likeness, and then you can pretty much just start rendering it. If you have seen any of my prior videos, you know that I talk about making sure that you're satisfied with what you're working on and never really settling. Like if something isn't quite going the way that you want it to, don't settle for that. Always go back and change it. And also change it early, because if you start to see something going poorly, that's the best time to start correcting things, because it's far easier to correct things before you get too invested in it. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but we're about to run into that problem. This is kind of getting to the point where this is the best that this painting looks, and I ended up making drastic changes in order to fix it, because again, I wasn't too committed. This was just a study. The reason that I did this study is I wanted to kind of focus on this face and make sure that I could work out some of the problems that I'm gonna then take into a larger painting. Now, I think my first issue with this is that I made the face a little bit too small. Like if I was gonna make it this small, I should have just had the painting cropped, or the canvas cropped to the size of the face. And that's kind of what I end up doing. I don't really think that this person, or the behind the scene in the mirror, is very helpful for the context of this painting. I think it will be in context of the larger painting, but right now, again, I was just using this to focus on the face, and I really just ended up making it too small. It's very difficult to make expressive portraits that are like kind of detailed. I was trying to focus on the details when they're this small. And this is where things really start to go downhill. I just kind of like, I'm losing the plot at this point. I'm just making things up. I'm having a lot of trouble with these eyes because it's really hard to get the details in there without like fucking it up. And this face just starts getting more and more wonky. I start losing that initial shapes that I had as I continue forward, just because I keep adjusting this so much. And I end up just really disliking where we ended up. So, start over. All right, I'm very unhappy with how this painting is turning out. So, what do you do when you're unhappy with something? You fix it by making drastic changes. So, let's do that. All right, so for sake of not just going back in and repeating the same things over and over again, I'm kind of just gonna jump past that initial block-in stage and kind of go back to where I was just cropped. It's far easier to paint portraits when they're larger because there's just more room, especially when I wanted to render this to the level that I wanted to. I think there was points in that previous painting or the previous attempt at this that were working really well, and nothing is ever a waste, I don't think. I mean, I learned a lot from that first one, where I was able to just jump right immediately into this one and kind of use a lot of that stuff that I learned, which was the original intention. I was going to take that first painting and go into a larger painting. But instead, I will go to here, and then I will take this and bring this into that larger painting, which should be more representational of the size of that final face. But yeah, this is it. This is what I wanted to get to. I hope you appreciate the video as I approach the end of it. And I'll just jump in here and show you the final results. If you liked this video or you found anything useful in it, please definitely leave a comment and let me know what's working, what's not. Again, I'm still in my first year of making YouTube videos, so I appreciate all the feedback that you give me, especially on the video aspect, the creation. If you have any topics or anything that you would like me to cover in future videos, I do read all of the comments. I just try and answer the questions and use them as a jump off point for the topics of my next videos. So I really appreciate that. But I think next on the agenda is going to be a tutorial on how to stretch a large canvas, along with possibly how to photograph a piece of artwork with zero glare. And here's the result. So huge thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you did, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully sooner rather than later.